Welcome to Gaining Vision. I'm Melanie. Thanks so much for clicking. To my returning family, the Visionaries, thank you for your continuous love and support. If you're new to my channel, welcome. Please feel at home. Have you had an opportunity to subscribe to the channel yet? If not, take a second, hit subscribe, and please don't forget to like and share. We all know the importance of doing our research before selecting a political party to vote for in any election. In South Africa, they've been encouraged to read through the manifestos of the political parties that they're interested in, but also to get to know the leaders, not just the leader in the forefront, but the leaders behind the scenes, how they interact with people, what they say in the public, in private, and even if they have opportunity to meet them in person. The reason for this is we know it's not just the political figure, the face of the party that is going to be pulling the strings, but in fact all of the political leaders behind the scenes that will make things happen. As I was doing my research, I was scrolling through YouTube videos and I came across several videos by interviewing Helen Zile, a top leader of the Democratic Alliance. And I found it really interesting of some of the things she had to say. So I thought we could look at some clips that she talked about what happened, the conflict of Palestine and Israel, coalition governments, her real feelings about the EFF, and even when she talked about some of the Democratic Alliance leaders that have left. Let's watch these clips together and come back and analyze them.
It's highly polarized, and it's not a simplistic answer that either of the extreme sides give. The resolution is in the rational center of realizing the reality now and saying the reality is a two-state solution with secure borders, recognizing each other's right to exist.
Very recently, South Africa took part in The Hague in saying this is genocide, or it should at least be considered as one. What is your take, as you personally and obviously as the DA?
As the DA, we said we recognize the International Court of Justice as a legitimate body internationally, and we abide by the decision of the court.
And personally, you obviously same position, I imagine.
Personally, I'm also a person who abides by the rule of law, yes.
Yeah, because do you consider what's happening genocide?
Look, that's a loaded term, and it's meant to be a loaded term. I know what genocide is very personally because half my family's been wiped out in one of the biggest genocides of history.
Yeah.
You could argue that Hamas's entire constitution aims at wiping out the Jews and wiping out Israel, so that's their aim. And you can argue on the other side, as people do. That is why the DA says we're not on an extremist organization. We don't want to argue with the extremes. Our job in South Africa is to bring together the rational center, who recognizes some harsh realities and is prepared to work with those realities. That's what we're trying to do in South Africa. That is why people who want to be populists and extremists don't fit well with the DA. We say we have to have the rational center of moderate South Africans who want to build a common society together. That's our aim. And whatever we say about the Middle East isn't going to change the situation there. Whatever we say, we can take any position we like across the whole spectrum. It's not going to change the position in the Middle East. What our job is, as the DA, is to save South Africa, is to rescue South Africa. That's our job. And we are doing it every day. We want a common society where everybody can live in peace and harmony and growing prosperity for all. Our job is to get that right. And the best thing we can actually do for the Middle East is to get that right and be a beacon to the nations.
When Helen Zile was talking about the conflict between Israel and Palestine, I found it interesting she was tiptoeing around the topic. She didn't actually say the word genocide in regards to Palestine and Israel. She had no problem talking about Hamas, but when referring to Israel, she referred to them as the other side. She didn't come out and talk about the fact that the South Africans put the charge to the ICJ in regards to genocide against Israel. No, she didn't talk about that. Instead, she talked about the rational center, Now, I'm not quite sure who she's referring to as a rational center, because that's who she's aligning with the Democratic Alliance. Not considering the impact that seeing what's happening in Palestine for many South Africans ties it back to apartheid and about feeling of oppressed. No, she's talking about perhaps those that are privileged. And when I think about Cape Town, where the Democratic Alliance is leading, I'm thinking of downtown Cape Town, how beautiful it is and how great it looks, but just on the outskirts, there's shacks where Black people and colored people lived. Is that the rational center? Or perhaps are they not having the experience of being oppressed themselves, the leadership, so they don't see the importance to South African people about standing tall and standing in unity on the topic of genocide against Palestine? It's something for us to think of.
While we're here solving South African problems, one of the most difficult ones we seem to be having is coalition government, because it leads to extreme level of instability, and service delivery gets affected by it. You've been caught up in all sorts of tricky coalition setups, Johannesburg being one of them. I think Nelson Mandela Bay being another one of those. What is your opinion about coalition government as an approach to running government in South Africa?
Well, coalition governments are going to be the way that governments are run in South Africa. We can't get away from it because proportional representation systems lead to coalition governments all over the world. Our big problem is that we don't have any thresholds. And so the tiny little parties who get less than 1% of the vote can end up being mayor of Johannesburg. Now, that's crazy.
Like what we have now.
Yeah. And that's completely undemocratic. That's got nothing to do with democracy. And so the bottom line is that is why most countries with workable coalitions ensure that they have thresholds, that if you can't even get 5% of the vote in a society, you don't then get seats in the particular legislature that the election was held for.
Are there countries that are running that successfully?
Of course, Germany, number one. Very successfully. I mean, if you don't get 5% in Germany, you don't get any seats. Denmark has 2%. In fact, every country that has a workable coalition system has thresholds that you have to meet.
Describe it if we had 5%, for example, in Gauteng, or in the country, because we're heading towards elections now. What is the likelihood, what type of turnout are we likely to experience in government or in parliament?
Well, let me just take Nelson Mandela Bay as an example. We needed to have an 11-party coalition there, which is completely unworkable. No one is going to make an 11-party coalition work. Not on this planet. And that is because people broke down the vote into smaller and smaller and smaller entities. Somebody from the Northern Alliance, now he calls himself the National Alliance, Gary van Niekerk is the mayor. He jets off to China first class, spends 400,000 rand, however many millions he also spent on this. He didn't even get, I don't think, 2% of the vote in Nelson Mandela Bay. But he's now governing, spending money as if he's the king. Nebuchadnezzar, whichever king you want to be, I mean, he's spending money hand over fist, right?
Yeah.
Now, if we had thresholds, just 2%,
Okay.
we would have probably a 4-party coalition in Nelson Mandela Bay, not an 11-party coalition.
And you're saying that's
And
easier.
you can work with that.
Yeah.
You can do something with that.
We are heading towards an election that is likely to be similar to 11 parties, if not more, because now we're dealing with many more political parties that are coming into the fore. Your Rise Mzansi have never been on the ballot paper, now they are, and many others. It's going to get worse, if anything. How then do we overcome this, from your perspective, this unworkable scenario that you've just described?
Well, we have submitted bills to Parliament. Siviwe Gwahube, who is our chief whip, has submitted bills to Parliament to fix it. And one will introduce a threshold, a low threshold. We're only asking for 1%. I mean, please.
Yeah.
That's a very low threshold. I think it's too low. I think it should be 2%. But we're asking for a very low threshold, but that at least may make coalitions more governable.
A 2% threshold in practice means parties who have less than 2% do not get a seat. So a vote that I voted as a citizen of South Africa gets wasted, some might say.
But can you imagine how many votes are wasted if somebody who got 1% of the vote becomes the executive mayor with all of those powers, and then the 99% of the rest of voters' votes were wasted? because that executive mayor has almost all the executive power in his hands.
In your take, what makes it possible for a 1% mayor to become mayor?
Well, you've seen it in Johannesburg.
Yes, we have. But what is the reason for it in your observation?
Well, the reason is very simple. To govern, you need over 50% of the council. And the big party may bring you to 38%. And then you have to add all the tiny, tiny little parties. And if you're lucky, you'll get 50.5%, 50% plus one person, right? And that one person may say, if you want me, you've got to make me the mayor. And they say that to both sides. And the DA says, no, thank you. We don't want a 1% party to be the mayor because that's not what people voted for, and that's not democratic. And the ANC says, sure, be the mayor.
Why do you think ANC is doing that?
Because the ANC doesn't want to leave power. They think they can control these mayors, these one-party mayors, and they do.
Are we likely to have a similar situation in national government that's coming now?
The critical thing for people to realize is that we need to consolidate the votes. The DA is the party of the rational centre, the non-racial rational centre. And if we want South Africa to work, and I have studied this so carefully, if we want South Africa to work, we have to follow policies of equal rights, of non-racialism, of the rule of law, of a social market economy that can grow this economy and attract capital and skills. That is what we need. And we want South Africa to work. We need to consolidate the vote around a party that has the capacity and the government experience to make it work.
There's some who say it's not only the DA that can bring that to the table. There are other parties who can do exactly that.
Who?
Action SA, Mzansi, and the ANC.
Where?
There's some who make a solid argument to say there are some people that can actually do that within
Making an argument and actually doing it are two fundamentally different things. Never ever believe.
EFF?
If EFF comes into power,
Yeah.
South Africa's rand will crash through the floor.
What will cause that?
What will cause that is that the economy will completely lose confidence in the future. When investors say there's no future in South Africa, they pull out all their money. The rand crashes. No one wants the rand anymore. No demand on the rand anymore.
But how could you say that with such confidence, and yet you don't know? You don't know the type of president Julius and Floyd would be.
I can tell you. Perhaps what we need is Julius and Floyd and whatever to become part of government in a province. One province. To see what happens to that poor province. Just one.
I'm still curious to know why you would say a statement like that with such confidence.
Well, I do, because I know what kind of systems in a democracy lead to prosperity. We don't have to reinvent the wheel in South Africa. We don't have to start experiments. We know from history. We know from all over the world what works for the poor and what doesn't in a democracy. Of course, you can have economic growth in an authoritarian state like China, but we've chosen a democracy. And if you want to have a democracy, the only way you can grow the economy and get jobs is through a market system. The very first thing that Julius will do, and this is what he believes in, the leader must control the party. The party must control the state. The state must control the economy and society. That recipe, and everybody knows that from all the history that we've been through in the last 3 centuries in the world, will completely collapse the economy and turn us into a totalitarian state. We know that. That's why I'm confident to say that.
China is different, though, and you said it.
China is an authoritarian state. There's no democracy there. We've chosen democracy. So if you choose democracy first, then you can only make it work with a market economy. You cannot have the party controlling the state and the state controlling society. So that's why I say that with complete confidence, because I learn from history. So never ever judge a political party by what they say. Judge them by what they do. And the DA is the only party in South Africa, the only one, that has a successful track record in governance.
When Helen was talking about coalition governments, I agreed with what she was talking about, the importance of having a threshold, a certain amount of percentage that each political party needs to achieve before they can be part of a coalition government. This makes sense. I'm curious to see if the bill that the Democratic Alliance is going to be putting forward to the Parliament will be passed before the upcoming government. As Helen shared what was actually happening in South Africa currently with coalition governments, I kind of sat there in a minute and thought, my goodness, really? It would cause any anxiety for people in South Africa. As Helen said, the Democratic Alliance feels strongly that it will definitely be a coalition government after the election this year. I also found it very interesting that she seemed to dance around the topic about the tricky coalition governments that the DA has been involved in, including in Johannesburg and Nelson Mandela Bay. She talked about the importance of having consolidated votes and that people should put their votes towards a party like the Democratic Alliance who has the experience of governing successfully. When the interviewer asked her about other political parties that could do the same, she asked who, what, when, what? She was surprised that this was what she was saying, but she encouraged everybody not to pay attention to what the political parties were saying, but to focus on what they had accomplished by their governing. I pondered what she said for a moment, thinking back to when I was visiting in South Africa, and I went to Mamelodi, an area where the DA is governing currently. Now, remember, we're not supposed to listen to what they're saying, but how they're governing. So why is it that Mamelodi still doesn't have access to water? I'll have to think about that. As I also thought about coalition governments, I was reminded of what Einstein once said. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different outcome. This is what the Democratic Alliance is saying. They're okay with what's happening, the status quo. But yet, without coalition governments working, I'm curious to see what will happen in the upcoming election. When Helen was asked about her opinion on the EFF, she laughed and she spoke with confidence and clarity. And I wasn't surprised that she took on the style of the Democratic Alliance, talking about catastrophizing and inflicting fear into the voters' minds. She talked about if EFF was in power, the rand would crash, the economies would collapse, and the investors would pull out. How does she speak on that? She has no idea if that's truth or not. She's speculating. She also talked about how she feels that the EFF will focus on leader focusing on the party focusing on the state, and the state focusing on the society. But she didn't talk about the big picture, what EFF is proposing to do. Yes, they talk about nationalizing the mines and the banks and some of the services, but they also talk about how they will provide service delivery at a different level. She hasn't included her thoughts about the manifesto or anything because she is so stuck in the fact that there'd be no change. But that's because the Democratic Alliance feels that they're the only ones to govern. She has no idea what Julius Malema and Floyd will do as president of South Africa, and she can't speculate that. But she was quick to talk about how she was dead set against the coalition between EFF and DA in Johannesburg. And in fact, she said it was because the two parties are so different and want different things. But I pondered this as well and thought to myself, in any coalition government, isn't it where political parties are supposed to put aside their political beliefs and thoughts and collaborate together to find solution for the South African people? Perhaps I'm wrong. She also talked about with this coalition, this is the first time that she had polarization with Musi, who was a Democratic Alliance leader at that time, because she felt that DFF and DA should not be working together. The one thing that she did say that I smiled at is that the DA and the EFF are the only two political parties in South Africa that know what they stand for. The other political parties are confused. Now, this is something big because, as we know, the Democratic Alliance says that EFF is enemy number one. But the fact that she gave a little bit of a glowing star that they know what they stand for, she did say, of course, that they disagree. And as I reflected on the way she talks about the EFF, a couple of points came to my mind. First of all, Democratic Alliance is for those that are privileged. They have never had the experience of being oppressed, and they are comfortable with the status quo. They don't want change. They are happy with the way things are. But many South Africans are looking for the change that the EFF can provide. We know that the Democratic Alliance has said that their job is to oppose the EFF, and that's what they will continue to do. However, I think the time will tell at the voting to see what comes up.
We have Taddeo-Nxumalo. You know that lady, right?
I know Taddeo-Nxumalo.
Yeah. And I'm sure you've seen that her life has gotten better.
Well, we would argue that.
One within the ANC that has it.
Well, I don't know everybody within the ANC, but anybody in the top positions, absolutely not. I mean,
The top 7 now.
No.
Coalition with the ANC, but rather with EFF. There was cooperation in the city of Tshwane a few years ago.
I was dead opposed to that. Dead opposed to
Really?
it. Very.
However,
I mean, that
it
caused my
gave
first
you-
polarization with Musi and others.
It gave you Mayor Msimang. That was that time when Mayor Msimang became mayor.
I know, but
You say you were dead opposed to it, but
I was
yet,
dead opposed to a cooperation agreement with the EFF. Dead opposed to it.
why were you opposed to it?
Because we believe in completely different things. Our job is to oppose the EFF. Ultimately, South Africa is going to come down to a contestation between what the DA believes and what the EFF believes. The ANC doesn't know what it believes. It's all over the place. The EFF knows what it believes, and the DA knows what it believes. The DA believes in constitutionalism, the rule of law, non-racialism, a social market economy, and progress for all. That's what the DA believes in.
Are you saying if I was to put a Cyril Ramaphosa on that chair, he will have different opinions to those beliefs?
I don't care what his opinions are. I want to see what he does.
Yeah.
It's very easy to say things, but can you do things? Can you become the government, let's say, of a city or a province or a country and do the things that are necessary to get progress? That's what's important. And to do those things, you need a lot of...
I look at someone like Bongani Baloyi, one of your best mayors, living. I look at someone like Musmaimane, who leader of the DA, Hemen Mashaba, living, Mbalinduli. There are so many. Those are the people who...
Not so many.
Yes.
There are a few,
Yeah.
and I can give you a chapter and verse on each one.
So looking at those, I'm answering your question as well. Looking at those, as a viewer, as a South African, I start to ask myself, what is it that they are uncomfortable with? Because a few years ago, they were the ones who were saying to South Africans, come join the DA. But they are the ones who are saying, actually, we were wrong. So that is why we pursue this, Ms. Zile.
There are lots more who are saying we were right. And let me give you a projection that I'm very confident of. Those who have left the DA for other parties will be sorry. That's my absolutely confident prediction about the future. Let me say about Musi Maimane. I supported him to become the leader and to become my successor. 3 years later, he commissioned a review as to why we did badly in the 2019 election. The people that he selected to do that review said the main reason was his weak leadership. That is why Musi Maimane had to step down. It had nothing to do with me. His own commissioners said that he had not led the party well and that we lost many, many votes through weak leadership. That is what his own commission said.
When Helen was asked about the Democratic Alliance leaders leaving, she got on the offensive. She talked, only a few of them have left. But when you look at the big picture and the reality, perhaps there's only a few leaders that left, but before they left, you know for a fact they were talking to their colleagues and comrades about why they were leaving and what they hoped to accomplish after leaving. When you look at history, such as Julius Malema and Floyd leaving the ANC, how many people followed suit? Maybe not right away, but after to join the EFF. Similarly with COPE, and most recently with President Zuma going and endorsing the MK party. people will leave. And this is what's been happening in the Democratic Alliance. Also, when asked about the reason why leaders were leaving, she was quick to say it wasn't her and used Musi as an example. Now remember, she had already let us know that she was not happy that EFF and DA were working collaboratively in a coalition government, and that was Musi's doing. But she went to blame him for some cocky mind idea about how he was a poor leader. But the reality is we have to look at the big picture. There's always a reason why a leader leaves where they're at, whether they're not being empowered or supported in their environment, giving them opportunities to fly free and do what they do best, because they're being controlled by the people in the background. And it's clear that Helen Zile is one of those types of leaders that will not let people do what they want, but only what she wants. So we have to pause and think about this. If this is the type of leaders that are behind the Democratic Alliance, is this who you want to vote for? I encourage you to consider this. After looking at all these clips and doing our research and educating ourselves about some of the leaders behind the Democratic Alliance, partnered with the manifesto, I will pose a question to you. Would you want this political party in charge of South Africa? I encourage you to drop your comments below. Let's have a conversation. Let me know what you think of Helen Zile's comments and what the Democratic Alliance is presenting for the upcoming election. Let's have a conversation. And please don't forget to hit the notification button, like and share, and we'll see you next time. Bye.